Have you ever experienced the taste of orange juice shortly after brushing your teeth? I imagine that unpleasant taste is similar to what the Israelites experienced in this week's Torah portion, Beshalach, when they sipped the waters at Marah and they were just unable to drink. As it says in the text, ki marim heim, because they were bitter. As Rabbi London mentioned earlier, the Israelites, having fled from Egypt in over 400 years of slavery, have just crossed through the Red Sea and they've landed safely on the other side. The waters turned back on the Egyptian army and their enemy drowned in the sea. The Israelites then continue on their journey into the wilderness and they are traveling for 3 days and they find no water until they come to this place where there is water, but it's too bitter to drink. So the people do what they always do. They complain to Moses. Moses cries out to God and God shows Moses an eitz, which is Hebrew and can be translated either as a tree or a piece of wood, or maybe it was a tube of Tropicana toothpaste, which Moses then hurls into the waters, and the eitz sweetens the water and the people are able to drink. This story speaks to us from multiple facets on this Shabbat and weekend in which we mark these events. Shabbat Shirah, the Sabbath of song, in which we find the song of the sea in our Torah portion, Beshalach, celebrating reaching the other side of the sea in safety, as I mentioned earlier. In addition, Tu B'Shvat, which is the 15th day, of the Hebrew month of Shvat, in which we celebrate Eitzim, trees, and that begins this Sunday at sundown, and Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service. We heard the words that he spoke at Beth Emin earlier, and that's officially observed on Monday. And so I have a couple public service announcements for 2 events, which Beth Emin is participating. One is Sunday at our annual Interfaith Evanston Community Martin Luther King Jr. worship service. That's 3 o'clock on Zoom. So look at your Shabbat email for that, as well as the annual Walk for Warmth, which will be on Monday at 11, and that's with Interfaith Action, raising funds for Evanston's emergency overnight shelter, and Beth Emin is one of the host congregations. End of the public service announcement. So let's take a look at some of the text in these bitter waters part of the story. So they came to Marah, that's the name of the place, but they could not drink the water or waters of Marah. By the way, the word Marah means bitter. Why couldn't they drink the water? Ki marim heim. And that's why it's named Marah, bitter place. Ki marim heim, because they, hem, were bitter. And so how are we defining the word heim here? In Hebrew, the word for water, mayim, for those of you who are studiers of the Hebrew language, when you hear that im at the end, you know that it's plural. So the word water, mayim, in Hebrew is plural. And therefore, in this phrase, ki marim heim, the heim could mean the waters. Our ancestors couldn't drink because the waters, plural, were bitter. However, we can also read the expression in another way. Ki marim hem, the heim could mean they, the people, were bitter. It's not that the water was bitter. It's that the people were bitter. And therefore the water tasted as if they had just drank orange juice after brushing their teeth. Perhaps we can understand why the people were embittered. They had been traveling in the desert for 3 days without water. They were cranky. But when then God shows Moses that eitz, that tree, that wood, and Moses throws it into the water, the eitz sweetens the water and the people could drink. Sunday night, we mark the Jewish holiday of Tu B'Shvat, the holiday of trees. I enjoy so many layers of symbolism woven throughout Tu B'Shvat Seder, from the different kinds of fruit to the colors of the wine or grape juice and more. And one symbol which we often highlight on Tu B'Shvat, this holiday of the trees, is the name we call for the Torah, an Eitz Chaim, a tree of life. The eitz that Moses casts into the water is symbolic of the Torah. And by immersing a metaphoric Torah into that which is bitter, it turns the bitter to sweet. There's a tradition in Judaism to read Torah publicly on Mondays and Thursdays, in addition to Shabbat, Saturday. Why? Some of us know because they were called market days, when there was a critical mass, a minyan, together to be able to read Torah and have those 10 people. There's another reason, and that's because we cannot sustain ourselves more than 3 days without Torah. So if you think Saturday, and then 2 more days you get Monday, and 3 more days you get Thursday, and then another 2 days you're on Shabbat again. We never go more than 3 days without Torah, just as a person cannot sustain oneself without water for more than 3 days. So Torah can be a symbol of an eitz, of a tree, and also of water. We need this sustenance, whether eitz chaim, this tree of life, or potable sweet water to nourish and sweeten our lives. During this last Omicron wave in the pandemic, where many of us are more isolated again, look, we're not worshiping together in person, we're through the computer. And outside where we live, it's been extra cold and icy. Many people are feeling fatigued, downtrodden, embittered. During this difficult time, there has been a metaphoric eitz, which has sweetened the metaphoric water for me and so many in the Beth Emet community. This eitz is the Jewish value of hachnasat hager. Hachnasat hager is welcoming the stranger. A cadre of dedicated Beth Emet volunteers has pitched in to welcome an Afghan refugee family to Chicagoland. Some of you put that as your Shechianu moment this past week. People have donated furniture, household items, clothing. Many people have made monetary donations. They've schlepped, built, and organized to create a home for this family. It's exciting to announce that the family arrived today. Such a mystery up until now, but they arrived today, and several of us greeted them upon their arrival to the area, and we welcomed them into their new home. We don't know too much about them. We do know that there's a mother and father and 3 sons, ages 7, 5, and 3, and 1 daughter who's a year and a half. And they don't really speak English. They just know a phrase here and there. And we look forward to getting to know them in the coming months and years ahead. I'd like to share with you a video of what the apartment looks like just before their arrival. And this video really portrays the work of so many hands. Just a moment, trying to. My cursor, did I freeze? I froze.
Well, if she gets her connection back, she sent me the video so I can share.
Thank you. It's just incredible. You can see I was going to originally give commentary as we went through the video, but I apparently don't have the bandwidth to do Zoom and show a video as well. So thank you for the tech help. You know, watching the creation and transformation of this empty apartment into a home and anticipating the arrival of this family has added such sweetness and joy to my life during this otherwise more difficult time. This furnished apartment is the work of many hands, embracing the value of Hachnasat Hager, welcoming the stranger, whom we hope will soon become familiar family to us as we move to the next stage of tutoring and mentoring the individuals in the family as they need it. And if you are interested in supporting the family in this way, please let me or Rosalie Greenberger know, and we can have you participate in helping this way. So thank you to all the individuals who contributed something, and special thanks to Allison Finkel, who is leading these efforts along with a core team of Kathy Cabron, Jesse McDonald, Leslie Shulroff, Rosalie Greenberger, and perhaps just seeing this video and hearing the update adds some sweetness to each of us as well. There's a parable that tells the story of an old farmer who was out in his field, and there was a road that went straight through the field. And one day a traveler was walking down that road, and he stopped when he saw the farmer and he said, "Excuse me, do you know the town up ahead further down the road?" The farmer said, "Yeah, sure." And the traveler continued, "Well, it just so happens that I'm moving there right now. And before I move there, I've never been there before, but I have to move there. I'm wondering what the people who live there are like." And the farmer replied, "Well, that's a good question. Well, what are the people like in the place where you're moving from?" The traveler replied, "Oh, they're wonderful people. They're always looking out for one another. They're so supportive, so humble, so honest. I'm really going to miss them. I'm going to have to, and I hate to have to leave them." And the farmer says, "I want you to know that the people in that town up ahead are just like that." The traveler is happy with the news and continues on. A little while later, while the farmer is still out in his field, another traveler comes along the same road heading in the same direction and stops when he sees the farmer and says, "Hey, you know that town up ahead further down the road?" And the farmer says, "Yes, sure." And the traveler asks, "I'm wondering if you can tell me what that town is like. I'm moving there. I've never been there, but I have to move there. And I'm wondering what the people who live there are like." And the farmer asks, "Can you tell me something? What are the people like in the town where you're moving from?" And the traveler responds, "Well, to tell you the truth, they're not good people. They're petty, they're jealous, backstabbing, and conniving. Everybody is competing with each other. It's very stressful to live there and not a nice place to live. And actually, I'm very glad to be getting away from them." The farmer with a sigh replies, "I'm very sorry to tell you that you're going to find that the people in that town you're going to are just like that too." And so what's the lesson from this parable? One's perception can become one's reality. We have a choice as to whether we choose bitterness or not. It's how we perceive life, which brings us to the late Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., whom we honor this weekend by continuing to work to bring about freedoms and rights for Black individuals, racial minorities, and ultimately for all people in this country. Freedom and rights to which this day de facto still not exist. In one of his sermons, Reverend King taught, "As my sufferings mounted, I soon realized that there were two ways in which I could respond to my situation, either to react with bitterness or seek to transform the suffering into a creative force. I decided to follow the latter course. Reverend King's perception and reality was not one of bitterness, but one of a creative force, and what a force he was. Additionally, in his 1963 speech at the Lincoln Memorial during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, Reverend King stated, "Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred." The messages of this famous march succeeded in pressuring the administration under President John F. Kennedy to initiate a strong federal civil rights bill in Congress. It's time again to use our creative forces to push forth other laws, this time strengthening voting rights. As Rabbi London mentioned last week in her Devar Torah, this is part of the efforts of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism in Washington, D.C. And she had mentioned last week the 2013 Supreme Court decision called Shelby versus Holder that gutted part of the 1965 voting rights. In this past year, over 500 anti-voting bills have been introduced. Over 34 have passed in 19 states with the aim to make it harder to cast a ballot. Through the Religious Action Center, Martin Luther King III sent a video message to Reform Jews, inspiring us on this MLK holiday to continue calling on our administration and Congress to take action until the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act are passed. Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, our God, the God of our ancestors, on this Shabbat Shirah, this Sabbath of song, leading us this weekend into the Jewish holiday of Tu B'Shvat and Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service, let our perception not be one of bitterness. Help us to see that we have a choice in how we perceive life, even when we are greeted with bitter experiences. Guide us to open our eyes, to live by the values of your tree of life, our Torah, and to drink from the cup of creative force, which will bring about a reality of sweetness. Amen.